Hi Nigel, how exciting. Another press conference. That's your third this week. So as a recap, the first one was when you exploited that young survivor from the grooming gang scandal. And remember, you made that inappropriate innuendo joke and you defended Prince Andrew. That was a good one. Then yesterday, Danny Kruger got up and said, "Don't worry everybody, when we're in charge, we're just going to ignore international law." That was a good one. And today, Zia and Lee were talking about how you are going to get Britain working. I'm not going to lie, Nigel, it's quite hard to keep up because today you're saying let's get everybody back working, but yesterday you were threatening to fire thousands of civil servants, like make more people redundant. Anyway, it doesn't matter, but it is quite a lot this week, isn't it? And I don't know why this came into my head, but remember when Donald Trump tried to flood the zone, so much was going on, people weren't talking about what was really going on. Now, I'm not suggesting for one moment that that's what you're doing. I'm sure it's just a coincidence that this week you wanted to get everything out there really quickly, even though none of the press conferences actually had any detail. But it's not as though you've got anything that you're trying to distract us all from, is it? Anyway, back to today. I was a little bit confused about some of your press conference, to be honest, because you were talking about people getting back into work with certain mental health difficulties. But actually, Labour acknowledged that ages ago and have been trying to do something about it, because you're right, for certain difficulties, going to work would actually help people. But interestingly, the Labour proposal seemed to have quite a wraparound care attached to it, as opposed to just, well, we'll do reassessments in person and that will sort it out. So I'm confused why you've called a press conference to regurgitate what Labour are already doing. And if you don't mind me saying so, when Lee Anderson was talking about basically the youth of the country need to get a bit of a backbone, look at the soldiers fighting World War I and look at him down the pit back in the day, he seemed to fail to look at any of the research around the mental health difficulties with young people in the UK today. And what staggers me with all parties, not just you, is how little is said about the impact of COVID on the long-term mental health of young people. Or indeed the nation, to be fair. Like it felt like you hadn't actually read any of the research to deal with the complexities as to why mental health services are letting down our young people. Like there was no mention about the fact that 14 years of austerity had decimated our public services. That young people were having to wait 2 to 3 years just to get an appointment, whereas we know, and the research clearly shows us, that early intervention is the key to a successful outcome when it comes to mental health difficulties in the young. Yet Zia seemed to be talking about reducing public services even further, actually, by finding all these savings, the savings that don't exist, and he knows that because it happened with dodgy Doge. It's a little bit like your council tax manifesto promise when you said that Doge was going to go in, find all the overspending, and those savings were going to be passed on to the people in the community. Whereas in fact, nothing's happened and their council taxes are all going to rise. Speaking of your councils, I was struck by the fact that you said you were amazed that so many people were interested in reform councils, because normally local councillors don't get that much attention. And I would agree with you. I am also surprised. But then you are putting your local councillors on the national telly all the time. Like here's Jamie McIvor, your head of local government, talking on GB News. In fact, he's become quite a regular. Like in this segment, he's talking about how vulnerable young girls are because of all the asylum seekers. It's almost like he's making out that all of them are dangerous. But that's daft, isn't it? We can't generalise, because that would be like me saying, well, all reform councillors have, allegedly, sent dick pics to somebody. You see, you can't just lump everybody in because there's one bad apple, as you say. I am so sorry, I didn't mean to say one bad apple, because that was the reference you made about Nathan Gill, wasn't it? Your man in Wales that's been done for being essentially a Russian asset, which you don't want us to talk about. My bad. But going back to today's press conference, then we had Lee and Zia essentially saying don't overtax the gambling industry. But the gambling industry isn't a public service, is it? It's actually something that causes untold harm to a lot of people. In fact, for many people struggling with their mental health, it's a maladaptive coping mechanism. Just one more thing about that really odd press conference. I know you don't support culture in any way, but could you please get a proper lighting person in to sort out what you're doing in these press conferences? There really shouldn't be two shadows, and if you lit it properly, that actually could be sorted out. That's what comes from having experts. You should try it sometime. Could we have a quick chat about little boy George? You know, Finch, the Warwickshire County Council leader of Reform, the 19-year-old, because he's now suggesting to Bridget Phillipson that you change the statutory distance that a child can walk to school. He wants an 8-year-old to be able to walk or get to school that's 5 miles away in a bid to save money. I mean, I'm assuming Doge hasn't found all the savings in his council yet either to suggest something so ludicrous. I mean, I thought under the circumstances, Bridget's response was quite measured, but there again, she did realise she was speaking to a child and pointed out that your reform policies seem to be taking us back to the Victorian era, which sort of ties in quite nicely to what you're doing today personally to try to just keep talking about you. And you're going to bring up in Parliament today a bill to take us out of the ECHR. But I'm confused because it was just last week you were on strike. Remember, you were sat in the spectator gallery because you didn't think it was fair that the Speaker didn't call on you to speak during PMQs, even though you're not the PM. I guess today you're not on strike because you can make it about you. You can stand up in Parliament and speak. God forbid you ever speak about Clacton, but you want to take us out of the ECHR. So in this week alone, you've told us you want to completely dismantle Westminster and ignore all international law. Then with no wraparound policy, you've called a press conference to say everybody just needs to get back to work. And then you want to remove the only mechanism that we have which could hold a government to account in the UK. Call me old-fashioned, Nigel. That seems to make Britain a lot weaker than stronger. Oh God, look at that, I've just realised. I can't believe the picture of you and the Russian ambassador, the one that you said you'd never met, has just popped up again. What are the chances? Anyway, good chats as you were.